So welcome to another Cypress webinar. With me are two guests from the same company called Carvana, Tyler and Arick. Tyler, Monteith, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Tyler Monteith. I am an engineering team lead on the quality engineering team at Carvana. I've been with the company almost 3 years, coming in March, so just under 3 years.
It's good to have you as a guest. And
Thank
Arick
you.
Hanna, how are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having us. My name's Arick Hanna, engineer 2 in QE Carvana. Currently on the finance team and been with Carvana for exactly a year.
Well, nice to have you both. And this is your webinar. You prepared all the slides. You want to tell us how Carvana actually uses Cypress Test Analytics to do the testing and debugging efficiently. Before we begin, a little bit of housekeeping. The slides, the link is displayed there, are already public, so you can follow the presentation along, or you can send it and look at the slides later on. We will get to the questions, and the questions are from you, our audience. You can ask a question at slido.com by entering event code Carvana, big surprise. You can also upvote other people's questions so that when we get to the question section at the end, the most interesting questions will be answered first. As always, this webinar is recorded and we'll send a recording and the link to the slides to everyone who has registered. So Tyler, why don't you take it away and let's begin.
All right. So a little bit of background on Carvana. Carvana is an online used car retailer. We are proud to say that we are the leading e-commerce platform for buying and selling used vehicles, offering as soon as next day delivery to 263 markets. I think we just opened up another one across the United States, the continental United States. We don't offer service in Alaska or Hawaii. And we also have a pickup option at our 26 patented signature car vending machines, which you can see here. After our poll, I believe. Did I go the wrong way? I'm already messing it up. I forgot how to use this. That's okay. So there's our beautiful vending machine. I think that one's in California. So yeah, consumers have the option to browse through more than 20,000 vehicles on Carvana.com with the ability to purchase and finance high quality used vehicles in as little as 5 minutes. I've heard that some people actually do go through the process that quickly, which is just absolutely phenomenal. And they can do this all from the comfort and safety of their home or on the go via a mobile device. So we offer a mobile platform via the App Store or Android Google Play Store, as well as a mobile browser option as well. Carvana vehicles all come with a 7-day return policy, no questions asked. So if you get the vehicle delivered to you, there's something you don't like about it since you bought it online, you have the ability to return it. And all of our vehicles go through a rigorous 150-point inspection. And they've never been in a reported accident, no flood damage, and we take the quality of our vehicles very, very, very seriously since we know that people are buying them without seeing them first over the internet. And with that in mind, we have a question: would you ever buy a car online?
This is a great question because, Tyler, I do see Carvana commercials on TV all the time. And I even seen your carmobile, driving around carrying a car. It's a big purchase. So it's interesting if you can actually convert it from physical experience to online experience. It seems like
we've got a race. We've got a race trying to get that.
It's not a race because only from Carvana, I count it as yes.
Yeah. So I guess if we count that, technically we are over. I'll take that. Yeah, it's an interesting, experiment, if you will. Trying to buy a vehicle, that large of a purchase. Usually everyone buys one, every 5 years, every 10 years, and it's a significant experience. So the founders of the company, Ernie Garcia, and a couple other people, they had that going into this, thinking this is extremely important. One of our core values is your next customer may be your mom. And pretty much in everything we do, we try to instill that kind of thought process. Everyone, from answering the phone calls all the way up through Ernie, we try to do our absolute best to make sure we treat everyone, with experience and tact, and just give them the ability to feel comfortable through this kind of process, answer questions along the way, provide as much information about the vehicles as we possibly can.
Tyler, so many people have answered, and it seems like the online part is important. You probably have a website or a web app, I want to say. You want to talk about that next?
Yeah, so here is our homepage, and then to break that down a little bit, let's make sure I do this right. I'm probably going to mess it up. Okay, so yeah, we have a desktop application that has mobile functionality as well. So if you're on a mobile device, it will scrunch itself up really pretty. That way you can view it correctly. And within that, we have a lot of technologies. We also have a lot of applications that our internal advocates use. We have hundreds of them working behind the scenes tirelessly to move vehicles across the country, a lot of logistics things that are happening as well. And with that, we have to support a lot of technologies that the teams are using to develop these applications that kind of all funnel into this one main point. Primarily, we are still pretty .NET heavy on our back end. Recently, in the last couple of years, we ported over to React on our front end, I would say for the majority of our apps, especially our customer-facing applications. And then we have a lot of stuff in between. We support Python applications, Java applications. We're starting to dabble into JavaScript Node backend applications as well, doing some cool stuff there, porting into Kubernetes, like just across the board, like there's a bunch of stuff flying around that make all of this possible. So within that, you can see here's our search page. I know this is a pretty basic shot. I tried to get a couple like GIFs or videos going, but they were too high res and I had some issues with that. But you know, if you go to our website, Carvana.com, and start playing around on the search page or the financing or car finder pages, you'll find that there are tons of apps and services feeding into these main points that allow you to search for, you know, thousands of vehicles with specific criteria, applying your financing terms where it'll actually pluck out cars that don't meet your financing criteria if you choose to finance. And even applying like a trade-in vehicle. A lot of people will trade in their older vehicle when they buy a new one, and you can actually apply that like as a down payment filter that gives you the ability to filter out even more cars that way. When you're going through the process of looking at vehicles on our site, you generally will come to the search page, you'll figure out which kind of cars you're looking for. And once you have some cars that you want to look at in detail, clicking on any of these search tiles will take you to our vehicle details page where you get the ability to click on the vehicle images. And when you do this live, you can actually spin the vehicle around in a full 360 picture view. You have the ability to open all the doors, zoom in, look at any defects, like if they're little paint chips. Like I said, we purchase high quality vehicles, but because they are pre-owned, things happen when people are driving them and there's little minor defects. And we want to make sure that we just make it as transparent as possible when people are searching and viewing vehicles. And then you have the ability to actually go into the vehicle itself and use like a 360 panning option to look around the entire interior of the vehicle. We also have the make it yours section on that page, which ties back into that financing and trade-in and down payment option. And there's an additional section too that allows you to look at the inspection reports, the original window sticker, and then all the details about the vehicle itself. So there's a lot of services, a lot of dynamic data being loaded into every single page that we have on our site. And on top of that, we have a native mobile app too. So a lot of the native mobile app backend actually pulls from the same desktop app just to have a lot of unity. But the actual app itself is completely custom. They built all of their own elements, all of their own descriptions and pulling everything in. So that way you get the same experience, but it's, you know, on a native app. So across the board, Carvana is doing a lot of different stuff, and there's a ton of services and a ton of teams. And it makes it pretty challenging for the QE team to try and scale up with that. It has been an interesting experience as the company's grown. Let's see. So with that, here is our team. This photo you can see on the right, that was taken 2019, pre-COVID times, back when it was fun and safe to go out into public and do cool stuff. This was actually shortly after we had purchased our Carvana license, and we got a lot of awesome swag from you guys. So we thought it would be really funny to wear all of our shirts to a local like event area within Phoenix, because we are hooligans, and we knew that if we got in trouble, we could just be like, oh yeah, we're with Cypress, like, you know, send the bill to them. But we've grown pretty quickly in the last couple of years. So Carvana was founded only 7 years ago. And they didn't hire their first quality engineer until 2014. By 2019, we had grown to a team of 15. And now we're up to a team of 20, and looking into the future, we hope to hire even more people as the company continues to grow as well.
And Tyler, can I quickly add, if you're watching this webinar, after the webinar, we'll send an email to everyone who has registered, and we'll have a link to the survey. If you fill that survey, you can get a Cypress t-shirt and pretend that you work at Carvana already. So
yeah, they're phenomenal t-shirts just to help sell that. They're soft, comfortable, they fit well, and they're great for active wear.
And they do remind you how to install Cypress on the back, because they have npm install Cypress.
That's right, they have the npm install command right there on the back.
Perfect.
All right. Okay, so let's kind of dive in a little bit of how we tested all of this stuff pre-Cypress, back in the dark times. So we had a Selenium framework that was built with C#.net, and we used the page object model to kind of classify and organize all of the information. The actual test environment that we used VSTS pretty extensively. It's now called Azure DevOps. Within that space, they have Azure pipelines, so that way we can define the build steps, pull the code down, run the actual test, gather the results, and post them somewhere. At that time too, in order to actually deploy the nodes out for the Selenium framework, we had a DevOps person build us a custom Java app that would go grab virtual machines, spin them up, and then connect them to the main hub of how the Selenium network worked. Since then, right before Cypress, we actually jumped into a new platform. This is our kind of like automation 2.0 pre-Cypress that we built. This used Kubernetes, and it was a custom Selenium image put out by a company called AeroCube, I think. And they had images that were called the moon pods. They were pretty cool. We were able to spin up to like 1,000 nodes on the fly, which is a pretty big step up for us at Carvana, because at that point we were trying to do mass parallelization. But it was difficult because we only had about 100 test cases, and that moon structure was very flaky still. And there were additional downsides as well that made things pretty difficult, which included 2-hour execution time. Even with all that parallelization, we had long running tests, a lot of retries. I'm talking like major flakiness across the board because we had some seriously long running end-to-end tests. And the debugging of that was just difficult. We actually had a lot of challenges trying to get video off of these Kubernetes pods and this Java grid scaler that we had. So like trying to figure out where tests fail, why they failed, what preconditions may or may not have happened. It was difficult to get back. So we actually focused quite a bit more on the logging structure for that application. So that way we could try to get some sort of clear sense of what was going on. But we weren't happy with it at all. We knew the direction that the company wanted to go with in terms of growth and scaling. And we knew that this was not going to work out long-term. There were some additional challenges too from like a process level. It was just super difficult to debug. Our longest running end-to-end test took anywhere from 14 minutes without a retry, if I recall correctly, up to 30, 45 minutes for that one single test case. Like I said, using the page object model in .NET, it had a higher barrier to entry. So our more junior QE, they had a difficult time jumping in and actually contributing and participating into the code writing process for that architecture. And at that point, we had a single test environment. There was a dev environment as well, but it's a no man's land, generally speaking. Like, I think a lot of places where the devs just go in there and do their thing. So we had the test environment reserved for us, but it was limited feedback. We weren't able to go into prod and actually test buying cars because we would have chewed up inventory and caused a lot of things to happen that wouldn't have been, good for the company. So we were just focused right there in our test environment with our, at best flaky test framework. And this is probably one of the biggest setbacks that we had, was just there was a lack of developer support within the org. Our front-end developers didn't really like the idea of having to spin up a super heavy Selenium solution in C#, especially because they were using JavaScript. They were all porting over to React. And our back-end developers, although used .NET, same thing, they didn't want to spin up a web browser to do their back-end testing. So we're like stuck in the middle, and we had like a mountain of changes and a mountain of new features coming towards us. And we knew pretty quickly, probably within like 8 or 10 months of having the solution, that we needed to make a change quickly. So that's when we started looking around. And the difficult constraints of having to like scale up to so many tests to parallelize everything, get the feedback that we needed, to get the analytics that we wanted from an enterprise size, so that way we could share with leadership like where everything was from a metrics and KPI perspective. Like all of that was lacking, and we would have had to probably hire a whole dev team to take care of all of those things. So we really started to shop around at that point and say, okay, what's next? So while we're here, Cypress, we looked at a couple options. Test Cafe was one that comes to mind. It had some of the features that we were looking for, but Cypress is the one that really, really nailed it for us. It allowed us to rapidly develop and test in a uniform, low barrier to entry environment. It's all based in JavaScript and Node. It's derived from Mocha, which is super easy to interpret and read. We love that about it. Our developers also love JavaScript, kind of regardless of their domain or focus area. The front-end devs, that's their natural playground. They love it. The back-end devs have an easier time working with JavaScript when they're using a different language, so that it's easier for them to adopt. And the dashboard is just like the shining jewel, I think, for our company, having to have all of that enterprise support. So having the parallelism taken care of out of the box. The analytics, of course, that came a little bit later. I think we purchased our license just prior to analytics really getting beefed up to where it is now. But we knew even then with what it was able to show us with, how many nodes to use, how many VMs to fire up, seeing the actual test cases and the outcome of those tests, seeing where each one of them got ran, being able to click on them and immediately see the video playback, see the screenshots. That was like a huge win for us. And it was super, super easy to do.
Beautiful.
So initial wins, we had to port over all the tests that we had in Selenium. And as soon as we ported them over, I think it took us like 2.5 months roughly to get all the tests over. It was pretty difficult getting through our old page object model and like, transgressing through every single page and diving into every single definition that we had. But once we got everything over and we realized that, we could put a lot of that logic into the commands area of Cypress and figured out how to set up the actual test runs. We had an extremely clear idea of why and where a lot of our flaky tests were failing, that we just kind of like knew they were failing and notated previously, but now I could actually see super, super clearly exactly why they were failing. In addition to that, video and screenshots right out of the box, whether we were running locally or in the cloud. We absolutely love that. I can't tell you how many times we would run our Selenium solution locally. And because it took so long, we'd set it up, we'd run it, we're like, all right, gonna go get some water, go get some coffee, use the restroom. We'd come back and the test had already failed. And we're like, okay, so I'm gonna start this test over and rerun it again. And then, someone taps my shoulder and we're like, oh yeah, let's chat. Missed it again, have to run it again. With Cypress, we just had the video dumped out so we could just click it, watch the video and see exactly where the test failed. We were able to wire up our results to Slack, which provided even faster feedback, especially when we started doing our cloud executions and our overnight runs. That made it super easy to come in the morning, look on our results and say, okay, where are we at for today? Where did all the dev teams deploy their stuff last night? And what do we need to start attacking right away? Because of all this functionality that we got out of the box, we were able to move back into areas or new parts of the site that were historically challenging for us to develop test automation for. Some devs even started participating and learning how to write tests in Cypress. They'd started hearing rumblings. They're like, oh, we heard you guys switched to a new tool. Like, what are you using? Is it Cypress? Yeah, absolutely. Like, here's what you need to do to install it. Here's our base repo that you can start digging into right away and learning. And the initial feedback was like light years ahead and way more positive than we ever got with Selenium. Like with Selenium, we're like, yeah, we're using Selenium. Sorry. And now it was like, yeah, we're using Cypress. It's this new sexy thing. Like everyone's got to start using it.
It's interesting because you said the developers kind of found out and want to jump, right? Because as a developer, I feel there's disconnect. I don't want to throw my code and someone else to find bugs because I feel bad about throwing.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
I want to find them first. And if I can run the test myself, well, I'll do it, of course. So that by the time it gets over the fence, it actually looks good.
Yeah, there was a little bit of like a salesmanship thing that we did in the org for a while where we went around to the teams and we're like, look at what you can do with this. Like it has hot loading. Like as soon as you write a test, you can just save it and it'll run itself and you can develop your code and your tests simultaneously. And they were just like, I know. And we were like, yeah, we know, like it's pretty freaking awesome.
It's kind of interesting because we're not paying you to say these things. You're actually paying us.
I know. I know we talked about it before, but Cypress has been a huge step in the right direction for us at Carvana. And maybe this is me more as Tyler personally. Like, Cypress is awesome. It's been a huge relief for us and all the things that it's been allowing us to do at Carvana. There were still some things though that were a little bit difficult that we had to figure out. You know, some had to happen with your support team. Other stuff we had to get with our DevOps team or with developers and figure out, you know, just unique stuff that we had to do at Carvana. We still need parallelization. So when we started our Cypress license and we started running tests, we only ran on one box because we didn't understand exactly like how to run on multiple boxes with just one command. Like, we're like, it's too easy. Like, we need to research it. We'll get into that. We needed to make sure we had a single platform for all of our teams to use. So whatever we ran our tests on, we wanted everyone to be able to access them at Carvana. And we had to support multiple test environments at this point. So between the time that we went from Selenium to Cypress, we actually spun up another test environment, our user acceptance testing environment. So that way we could, you know, kind of soundboard or clarify a lot of our tests in our test environment without having to go and like actually damage data in prod. So we can keep that stuff pristine.
That would be bad.
Yeah, and we absolutely had to support multiple Cypress projects, and the video and screenshot capabilities were a must wherever we ran these tests. And there were other things too that we had to consider, like we wanted to run different types of tests for load testing, functional API testing on these boxes as well. And so we wanted to know from people around the industry, how do you guys use parallelization with Cypress? Because it took us quite a while to figure out a mixture and a magic setup that worked just right for us.
Right. So it's a great question. You know, go to slido.com, enter Carvana event code, and pick an option. I think many people run Cypress on a single CI machine. Hopefully it runs fast enough so they don't feel time pressure. I'd say anything longer than 5 minutes, you probably want to already like optimize it, right? It becomes a bottleneck. I call it a coffee-driven development where you fire it off and you go to get coffee and you come back.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, that was a big concern for us too on a CI perspective. So when we really established Cypress, we started going to all the teams and we're like, hey, you got to start writing Cypress tests to help us keep up with like the crazy amount of stuff that you're deving. Yeah. And a natural reaction, especially from the leaders, was like, well, how do I make sure that I don't slow down my builds? Yeah. And we're like, well, that's a great question. So what we have for you here is our, you know, our parallelization option. And that put a lot of people's worries and heartburn to rest when we finally did get our parallelization up and running.
Excellent, excellent. I'm glad that people are voting, and I definitely see that majority of people it's like untapped market, right? Definitely a lot of room to grow. Perfect. Let's see how you folks have done it.
Yeah, so like I said, it was a bit of a journey, and I think that we're still, you know, figuring out the most optimized way to get there as our constraints have changed over time. But we'll share exactly where we are today. So using, like I said, the dashboard to really hone in and see, oh, for example, in this regression test that we have, we knew that we could go from 1 machine to 4 machines and shave the test time down by, you know, 57%. When we started seeing these in our multiple projects, those are usually the ones that we attacked first and prioritized when we wanted to do parallelization. In terms of actually accomplishing that, we used Azure pipelines within Azure DevOps, formerly Visual Studio Team Services, to build and maintain our cloud execution steps. That's pretty typical. It's similar to Jenkins. You know, you set up your steps, it runs your tests. The trick that we had to figure out was like, where do we send the tests? How do they actually run, like on the physical location? So what we ended up coming up with using Cypress's documentation and working with your support team was, we have a set of 10 Linux VMs that we use. They have all the basic requirements that we need to run Cypress, in addition to some custom things that we have as well. Within that, we also use Slack integration so we can report out results and share failed tests faster, more efficiently. And then we followed Cypress's guides almost to the T for the Azure stuff specifically. And it actually came out to be something pretty simple. So within our Azure builds, we have the option here to select how many agents we run across. We had our DevOps team make the connection to point to those specific virtual machines. And then for us, all we had to do is add a bash command, which is exactly what you see here. npx Cypress run. We choose the browser that we want. We have a specific video flag. So when we run locally on our developer machines, we keep video off because it actually taxes our CPUs. But when we run in the cloud, we want it on so that way we can get that delayed feedback later. We've got a custom group flag, our record, and our key settings. That way we can actually apply it to the specific project that we want. We use a spec flag so that way we can run specific spec files. We kind of treat our spec files like test suites, if you will. So we have like a smoke spec for our smoke suite, regression, etc. We could pick our environment from the config file that we followed from Cypress's documentation as well. So we can run it in dev, test, UAT, etc. And then the parallel option, which is obviously the most important piece for running in parallel. And then the CI build ID, which we pass in an Azure option, which gives it a custom unique ID that gets shared across all the agents. And that's what actually stitches them together and sends all the tests up. That for us was like the big kind of light bulb aha moment. That's how they did it. When our DevOps team asked, we're like, I don't know, as long as you set this stuff up, like it just works and we don't have to figure out like load balancing and all that fun stuff. Like just send it to those boxes and get it running.
It's kind of funny because the dashboard will figure out, oh, all these machines that pass the same build ID but for the same project, they all want to split the tests, right? Let's say you have 100 specs. Well, I'll give each machine the first spec, and when it's done with it, it will come back and I'll pull the next spec from its queue. And so if you look at the dashboard and it says, if you add 2 more machines, you will speed it up. You can just go and change number of agent from 5 to 7 and done. Nothing else will change. That's what we really want to accomplish. And I think so far it's working.
Yeah, sometimes we describe it like magic, right? Because like you said, it'll just pick which specs to run, when, and why. Which for a QA team, I think is just, I think is phenomenal because before Cypress, like we had to figure out exactly how to set up the connections, how to set up the tests, how to spin up all the nodes. And with Cypress, once we realized the capabilities of how easy it was, you know, we just grabbed hard and ran with it. Nice. We love it.
Nice.
Okay. So in addition to the parallelization, we also take advantage of the analytics. So that way we can make more powerful decisions at Carvana because we're operating at such a large scale now. Going into a certain spot and making decisions without data can be costly sometimes. So we really have started to take advantage of the analytics, especially as the Cypress team have added more features recently. We've really started to latch on and bake them into part of our reporting, our metrics, and our KPIs. Something we wanted to highlight a little bit, which we thought was really neat, was over the last 3 months, we've increased our test suite size by about 41%. And this arrow here will indicate when we actually added retries in, when I think version 5.0 came out, and how that affected our test duration time. So you can see we added the code in on this date, and within the next week, our average test time skyrocketed pretty significantly up to 1.5 hours, which was obviously very bad. But we haven't ran in retries with Cypress since we started using it for almost a year. So using the analytics dashboard to identify very quickly where we had problems creeping up on us, we were able to go look at all the individual test cases that were running long, that were flaky, and able to shave them down and make efficiency gains very quickly. And even though we've continued to add test cases, I feel pretty good that we've kept our average runtime. This was a fluke day that we had with our VMs. We fixed that. But other than that, we keep it in a pretty steady 30-minute range, even though we have almost 200 test cases. And we want to try to keep it around there, even as we add more spec files. So like I said, we were able to go to the additional analytics pages within Cypress. We were able to see why are these tests running for so long? What are these outliers doing that are causing our tests to run for extreme amounts of time? So clicking on that bar graph gives you this readout. We were able to see, oh, okay, it's our financing purchase process tests, which are by far our longest running tests. We were able to see not only is it taking, at least on an average 2 minutes to run, but when the retries were introduced, it just stacked on top of itself and made it even longer. So it flagged it that it was flaky too. And we're like, oh, what's this? How do we take advantage of that and fix that as well? Seeing the failures too, we were also noticing that some of our test cases were failing 100% of the time, which I don't know if without the analytics we would have caught as quickly. We would have eventually saw it by reading our daily readouts, but seeing this, we were able to click on it and see, oh, okay, yeah, someone fat fingered the element definition, which caused it to retry even more exasperating a lot of the issues we were having. So we were able to click into that and debug it and fix it very quickly.
Tyler, I'm looking at this charts and now like I'm seeing it with like probably fresh perspective now. I think everything like to the right of the median should be like warning, red flags right here. Like just look at those, right? Like the abnormal, the things that are completely outside of what most of the tests are doing, and just pay attention to that.
Yeah. Generally speaking, like we'll start looking up at like the why are you failing more than 1 out of 5 times. This one really caught our eye right away because you're like, whoa, 100% failure rate. Like what's going on there? This test has never passed. Like how did it even get committed? But once you break it down and you actually realize what it's doing, it makes a lot more sense. One thing we don't use as much yet, just because we're still developing our strategy, is like all the filters you have at the top, filtering by branch. We've used that a little bit because we've had some special cases where like the dev teams have asked us to like jump into specific settings. So we'll switch to those branches and use that within the analytics. The duration of the data, I use that one pretty frequently when I'm sharing it with other teams. So I'll change it from 30 days to a year. Run group, not as often by us. Committer, sometimes we'll use. The big ones for us are definitely branch. And where is it? I think it's browser. Yeah, that's the other big one we use pretty frequently. So we can say, what's the difference between Chrome and Edge and Firefox are the big 3.
There's one more thing, like while this filters, sometimes management wants to see the overall historical directions of tests.
Yes.
Are we increasing number of tests? If yes, by how much?
Absolutely.
Are we running reliably and develop? Are we running reliably in your testing environment, right? Or is it somewhat worse, right? Especially as you take longer view and you're asking yourself, should I hire more developers or more QA, right? Or pay for Cypress license renewal, right? And so on.
Yeah, this one has become a pretty key figure when we come to like, what's the frequency? Because we can look at this versus like the commits that are being made by the devs. Like there should be some correlation. Like if we're adding new features, there should be more tests being developed. So we'll use that as another good signal of like the test health as well. All right, so now I'm going to switch it over to Arick. He's going to talk about test retries, which have opened up a whole new world for us at Carvana. Like I said, our long-running end-to-end tests have been historically painful, but test retries have given us a brand new like fresh breath into the space.
Yep. Yeah, so let's dig into test retries. Thanks, Tyler. Like he was saying, with test retries, we've been able to move into areas of our site previously avoided. Example, our purchase process, which is core functionality of our business. It's always been very difficult to automate. There's so many different steps of our purchase process that rely on many different internal and external services working together. And changes are constantly being made and pushed to our test environment by multiple different engineering teams. As you can see in this code here on the right, just to create a purchase, it takes approximately 50 lines of code. So you can see where a lot of things can go wrong pretty easily. I know a lot of you might say, why aren't you mocking or stubbing these calls? That's because we have a requirement to complete an actual purchase, hit all the downstream integrated services, where we wouldn't quite get the feedback we wanted from mocking. And another great feature of retries is that we can retry an entire suite, or we can retry individual tests. You can see that this purchase process test here, we retry 4 times. We typically set it a little higher for tests that tend to be a little more flaky. For a typical UI test or for the entire sheet, we would normally set retries to be around 1 retry per test. And moving on, test retries and analytics has been a huge win for us. We've been able to easily determine which tests are flaky. We can see the overall flakiness, the severity, and a breakdown of each flaky test right here on the dashboard. As you see in the screenshot, purchase process test takes top spot as our most flaky test, followed by pre-qualified, and they all have medium severity. So using all of this data, it's really helped us tremendously with development efforts to determine and understand why certain areas of the application are more flaky than others.
And I want to just kind of quickly explain to the users what is a flaky test. when you enable test retries, either globally or per test, Cypress will record if that test failed and then was retried and then passed. So all the tests that with no changes in the same run, sometimes pass, sometimes fail, are marked as flaky. That's it. So you have to enable test retry. So we know that nothing else has changed when we retried it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nice seeing these. We can go into each test. We can see that they've been flaky. You know, they might be passing 100%, you know, day by day, but we still want to go in and see, you know, why these tests are failing. And this makes it so much easier to, you know, just pinpoint in this test, see what, you know, how many retries it's been doing, and just go in there and see what the failures were. And if, you know, anything could, because, you know, you could get into the aspect where stuff is actually failing one time and it could pass the next, where you're actually could be like bypassing a bug. So it's always good to go in there and, you know, have this data to look at. And then let's get into debugging. So as you know, debugging in the past, something that's very time consuming. You're always running in circles trying to figure out why tests were breaking. You know, just overall not a very fun process. But when it comes to debugging tests with Cypress, this flaky test dash has allowed us to quickly and efficiently debug failing and flaky tests. So the test shown here, again, is another one that's involved with purchase process. It tends to be pretty flaky. And in the past, it was very difficult to debug. It's an area of the application. It requires numerous data inputs that talk to many different services, which determine the outcome of the tests that we're trying to do. We've been able to narrow down that data, and along with retries, testing this area of the application has been made possible. And despite the flakiness, the test has a very high pass rate. If you take a look at the screenshot on the right, we can see the most common errors. So you can see that line 65, panel with auto pay, it's expected to find that element timed out. And then line 66, oops. A little laggy on me.
Yeah, no worries. There we go.
Thanks. All right, yeah, so we can see that line 65, 66 are our most common errors. You know, it makes it easy to debug and fix this issue, or to go and discuss with devs why this area of the application is so flaky for us. I mean, 20 times and 8 times, you can see that, you know, thumbs up here. We either have to fix the test or bring it to devs, bring it to their attention and get this fixed in the area of the application. That's why it's so flaky.
Many people say, well, test retries just mask bugs, but I disagree. They, in realistic system, block you from actually finishing the build. And then what do you do? Well, you just rerun the build again, and it passed, and you never like investigate further, to be honest, right? But at least now you will continue the build because it actually passes, right, at the end of the day. But still investigate it and resolve it.
Yeah, that's a good point, Gleb. The purchase process, like if you think about what you actually have to go through to buy a vehicle, if you've ever done it, like going to the dealership, it's like, it's a whole day event. So to try and consolidate that like into an online format, it's a significant amount of steps that you have to go through, which we try to make as fast and efficient as possible. But from a testing perspective, that's very difficult. You know, there's a lot of data input and permutations that we have to take to. Like if you think we service the whole country, you could have a customer buying in California who's using all cash, who might have a trade-in, who might want gap coverage. And then that car might have to ship like all the way across the country, like multiply that by all the different data input that you have to deal with. And flaky tests are just a part of our business. So to have the ability to retry it and then like iron down or drill into exactly where that flaky data might be allows us to like, you know, knock that one out and move on to the next thing and still allow builds to pass and have devs feel confident that our code and our test code is working properly before we ship it.
Because if dev is cannot do this, right? If there are no test retries and if build fails and it fails in something you're not working on, guess what? You'll just stop writing end-to-end tests because you don't want to be doing this, right? So test retries is kind of compromise. where you can still pass the build if it passes, not right with any errors. If it passes, and go back and say, hey, this panel, something's wrong. Is the team responsible for that? Can you please look at that and make sure that you can find the root cause? Yeah. It's a very controversial feature. Once we released it,
I know for the Cypress team, there was a little bit of pushback, like, no, it kind of goes against our main thing. But for end-to-end tests, it's been like a real big saving grace for us because we've tried to follow like the Cypress dictation, like unitize as much as you can, isolate as much as you can. But we still had this gap where we just wanted to feel absolutely secure that all our downstream dependencies from a customer perspective were taken care of. And retries really allowed us to jump back into that space that we'd been lacking in for a while.
Right. And I say, if you have multiple environments and dev is least reliable when testing, when staging, and when production, turn on test retries in dev, right? Because it's flaky by default. And then maybe bring it down, right? Using CLI parameters in the test environment. So you still use test retries, but not 10, but let's say 3. And in staging, maybe 1 retry, and then you do the smoke test in production. 0 retries has to work, right? But it's fine. Yeah. You can do that.
Yep.
All right. So conclusions. Finish us off.
Yeah. Pass it back to Tyler.
All right. So, we've covered a lot of stuff today. I think the things that we definitely want to highlight have been our biggest wins since switching over to Cypress. It was really hard to gather data from Selenium because we didn't have the awesome dashboard analytics feature, but our memory serves correct. And looking from past logs, we had a 2+ hour execution time, taking the same amount of tests and actually multiplying that by 1.5 or 150%. We've been able to shave down our test execution time by 72%, which has allowed us to continue to scale and be as fast as the rest of the org. We have significantly less failures, even though a lot of the stuff we've shown you today seems like, oh, there's stuff all over. We're running our test cases hundreds of times a day. We have on average, I'd say 2 to 5 failures. And it's usually these flaky test cases that we've shared with you today. So even though we still have some, like before it was 30, 40, 50% failure rate, now we've shaved it down to absolutely minimal true failures that need to be investigated. In that time, since we've become more confident, we've had retries reintroduced, we've been able to jump into way more portions of the site. We're up by 140% for the year. And in the last, I think it was 3 months that we showed, we did 41% alone. So we've had a lot of great growth because of that. And because of all of the flexibility and ease of use of Cypress, about half of our engineering teams at Cypress or at Carvana utilize Cypress in some way. Whether they're consuming our tests, they're writing their own tests, or they're collaborating across teams to use like a shared set of tests. We've just had a huge uptick in people doing Cypress test automation at Carvana, which is, one of our main goals is to grow in that quality engineering space, get more people to think testing minded, and use the tools that we have to be more confident and ship better code.
Very nice.
Q&A time.
Well, as you can see, there are 50 questions, 55. Oh, wait, the questions are being added faster than test retries. So, Tyler, maybe what question catches your eye so that we can pin it to the top of a board?
Yeah. What do you need me to do? Move it around, maybe?
Maybe this one, right? So I'll highlight the question, right?
Okay.
Do you mind answering the first?
Yeah.
Question? So
can you please share a little bit about best practices that you use to make it easy to maintain being scalable besides page objects? We've experimented with quite a bit, actually, trying to figure out like, how do we get one team to be able to use another team's code? Yeah. And how do we collaborate across the board and just grow this repo that we have? Commands are probably one of the biggest things. If you think about Cypress specifically, the Cypress commands area has allowed us to write a lot of code across the board and just condense it into a single command. We actually have multiple command files now. So we had the first one that kind of comes with like the getting started example repo with Cypress when you first fork it. But we've actually added more command files that are specific to sections of the site. So it's kind of like a weird hybrid of page object model and Cypress commands where like we have commands for our purchase process, we have commands for our search page, and we just try to consolidate all of those features and functionality to those specific command files to help spread it out. So that way it's not like one 10,000 line command or Cypress command file.
Nice. Can I ask you, what do you use for native mobile app automation, right?
App
Not Cypress.
automation. Yeah, so we would love to use Cypress. I'm just going to throw that out there if we could. But in the meantime, I think we're using a lot of Espresso. We've dabbled in Appium as well a little bit, but it's similar to Selenium, and we don't like that as much. So I think our mobile dev team uses Espresso and a couple other things that I'm honestly not that familiar with, unfortunately. We want to break into that space a little bit more, using something similar to Cypress, or hopefully Cypress in the long term.
This is something that I think you as heavy users can really answer, right? What are the pain points of Cypress that you would like us to address?
Retries was a big thing for a long time, but we've addressed that now, right? Those have been added in, which have been great. I think other things would be maybe like we've had problems with the Docker implementations, and I know we've worked with the support team to try and like iron those out, but certain parts of our site use desktop browser heavy dependencies that don't load into Docker for reasons X, Y, and Z. So we've had to like make a lot of considerations and strategy changes because of that, which really isn't that much of a detriment to Cypress, but it is one of our big pain points that comes to mind as of recent. Yeah, I think overall we've had a lot of good success with Cypress.
Well, if you have any pain points that you still want to address, Open GitHub issue, we'll be happy to address it. This is kind of interesting question, right? Like, how do you know when to write an end-to-end test, or even if you need one?
Yeah, so back in the day with Selenium, we were a bit naive on like what tests to write and how. So everything was essentially an end-to-end test.
Yeah.
Now we take the approach more of like, does this have to be an end-to-end test? Can we stub this? Can we mock this out? Like, what are we really trying to get at here when determining what needs to be asserted at the end of that test? So for our end-to-end tests, the purchase process that we have is probably one of the few places that we actually end up still writing end-to-end tests. And that has to do with those downstream dependencies that we actually can't call via the site intercept command. We're just stuck with having to actually go through the whole thing and assert from the UI at some point that something came back correctly. And that has to do with the architecture of the system. There's just like no way getting around it. I think for a lot of teams, like when you first start out, the end-to-end test is like the easy low-hanging fruit that you start off with. But as the size of the repo grows, the size of the app that you're testing against grows, it becomes really difficult. So we try to very quickly like pivot to, let's just stub this, let's just mock this, let's isolate this test, let's not chain our tests together, and let's just really try to like adopt the Cypress way of testing as much as possible and leave the end-to-end test to be very far and few in between.
Gotcha. Why not, right? You've shown a command. If I understand correctly, your spec is really the name of a folder, and then you have multiple spec files inside the folder, right? That's how you organize all your test scripts?
Yeah, so how do we organize our test scripts? Can't put all scripts into one folder. We've had good success with that. So we have like our integration folder, and then below that, we actually break out a lot of our folders by team. And then within that, we have regression folders and smoke folders. It can get a little bit tricky with doing the pathing and the dynamic pathing in Cypress. But going back to your guys' documentation has made it really easy for us to figure out like, oh, okay, like you can't use that type of path here. You have to pull in that file this way. Has made it a lot easier for us to figure out exactly how to divide things up. Initially, we just ported over everything the way that it was from Selenium. But then after looking at how Cypress wants you to set things up, we started breaking things out more by track, and then by page, and then by feature. And then each feature essentially has a spec file per page and then per team at Carvana.
Gotcha. I'm going to put in the chat our real world app that we kind of put our design thought into, and you can see how we organize test scripts there. This is a good one. Do you use visual regression, right? You showed us functional tests.
Yeah, so I want our team to jump into visual regression testing, showing you guys our vehicle details page with that really cool spinner, how it throws the whole vehicle around. Cypress can't do that with the functional testing. Like I can assert that the view is there, but I can't actually click and drag across it without doing some really weird JavaScript stuff. So visual regression testing is a place that we want to start looking into and researching because our site is so dependent upon being able to visually inspect vehicles. And that presentation is so important to making a customer feel comfortable in the purchase that, it's top of mind for us to jump into that area.
And for our viewers, we've done a bunch of webinars with open source tooling and third-party services that actually offer visual testing. So just check it out. All of them have a Cypress plugin. This is a good one. And maybe Arick, maybe you want to tell us how you debug tests that only fail on CI, like the frustrating ones, but always work when you run Cypress open, but somehow still manage to fail on CI.
So for this, for this, we like to go to the dashboard, see why it's failing, go log into the website, make sure, doing it manually, we don't run into any issues. And then also look at what browser version we're running, and then try to duplicate that locally. If it's sometimes it could be like a Chrome versus Electron issue that we run into. That's like the most common thing we've seen running in CI versus locally.
Right.
Yeah.
You can definitely look at the failing test and see which browsers and which operating system it fails on.
Yeah.
I want to suggest, and I'll post the link. We have a little bit of a documentation how to debug a flaky test that only fails in CI. It's difficult, right? There could be timing issues, race conditions, or browser issues, and so on. What can I say? Maybe we want to replace big end-to-end tests with smaller tests, right? But kind of do each part separately. So I'll mark it. Tyler, you said that you actually have multiple Cypress projects, right? Every team has their own project. So in the end, you have a bunch of them. So how do you organize them?
The teams have, adopted Cypress, or at least some of them have started to. Generally speaking, we'll fork our repository, and then we'll just kind of gut the stuff that they don't care about or they don't have to worry about. And then we'll just place it into a test folder or an existing test folder within their project or their repository. And then from there, they already have access to our configs, which have all of our backend calls, so they could create an account, for example. They can start clicking around on some common use case DOM elements. I've not had the opportunity to do a Cypress project or multiple projects within one repository, actually. That's very interesting. We've not thought of doing it that way. One thing we've started to think about is how could we, if possible, share common use cases without even actually having to have multiple Cypress repos. So we've started looking at NPM a little bit, is there a package we could put out internally to share some stuff around? But the easiest thing for us right now is we fork our project, we got what they don't need, and then they get to keep all the good stuff, like the base URLs, the configs, and then just start up and running and scaffolding their tests out.
Gotcha. So you kind of not divide and conquer, but instead throw away and take it, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna decentralize it a little bit. Yeah.
This is a question that's always on my mind, right? So do you use fixtures to load your data, or Arick said that you want to go through all the systems at the end of the day, so maybe there are no fixtures? What do you do?
You want to take that one, Arick, since you're the main user of our data?
So we do use fixtures, and we also do generate, we do both actually. So for purchase process tests, we have fixture data that brings in purchase data, and then we also generate a random user. We have what we call star data users. So we hit an API call, it brings in a random person, social name, all that stuff. So for each test, basically we start with a fixture. We run the random generator to generate a random user, generate a random email, and then we kind of save that data to that fixture file. And we use that fixture sheet throughout the whole test.
Gotcha, thank you.
Which makes it a lot easier. Yep.
I think we have time for maybe two more questions. One, I just want to say that right now you cannot use Cypress for loaded performance testing because Cypress adds its own overhead because it wraps every event in your browser. So it's not meant for performance or load testing. You can certainly do load testing by just spinning up so many Cypress boxes, but there are other tools that probably do it better. Here's a good one, right? So you're probably doing a lot of end-to-end tests, but you said that not everything is an end-to-end test. Do you write separate unit tests? What's the balance right now?
Yeah, I think, so I wouldn't call them like traditional unit tests, right? They're not actually running application code only on, a local instance and evaluating methods and functions and lines of code. What we try to do is think of our tests that aren't end-to-end as unit tests. So we try to like compartmentalize them and isolate them as much as possible, using stubbing, mocking. That way we can just say, I just want to test this one unit or one feature without any noise or any weird implications coming in from an unknown source. So we'll do some API testing, but we don't actually do like traditional unit testing with our Cypress implementations today. It's either a couple end-to-end tests, a lot of unitized functional tests, and API tests.
I gotcha. Thank you. Maybe one last question. Do you like this third one? Are you testing it against live web deployed or isolated environment? Do you? Yes. So do you? Apparently, you're testing a staging environment, right? And test environment. Do you run something against production by any chance?
Not with Cypress. We have a couple of manual cases that we'll do there very, very seldomly. We do have a staging environment that shares some prod information. So there we don't do anything really heavy duty. It's some light stuff. We try to really follow like a shift left method. Like the lower environment we are, the more regression we want to do. And as the stages of the product move up through the cycle, it's just like regression and then smoke and then staging and then it's out to the world. Using live web deployed. Yeah, generally speaking, we try to isolate down to our tests and our UAT environments. And we try not to touch prod as much as possible, just because we don't want to buy a car accidentally and then like, have it shipped across the country and then like who's paying for it. So we stay out of there completely.
Yeah, but you get to keep it, right? So
that's true. That's true. That's true.
Well, excellent. I think we ran out of time. We will answer all the questions on Slido. So can we go to the next slide, please?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the next slide is thank you. Thank you to Tyler and Arick and to everyone who tuned in. It was my pleasure. Thank you, folks, so much for preparing this webinar and sharing what you're doing with Cypress.
Yeah, absolutely. We are so happy with Cypress and happy to share our story with that success and, get to learn from everyone in the industry on, how they're using Cypress and what they're doing to make their testing better. Thank you for the opportunity. We appreciate it.
And a reminder, we'll send an email with this video, link to the slides to everyone who registered for this webinar. Take care and happy testing.
Bye.